Hello, everyone. My name is Stacy Nell. I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas African American Affairs Commission. It's time for another Lunch and Learn, and it has been a solid minute since we have done one, but there is a question coming up on the primary election in this fall that I think it's worth it to take some steady time to talk about, to get informed about, so people can make an informed decision when they go to vote. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Teresa Woody. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
And I had an opportunity to meet Miss Woody, I think it was 2 Saturdays ago, where I moderated a panel discussion that took place in the Wyandotte County area to talk about this. And Miss Woody was on the panel. And I thought the conversation went really well.
Yes, I really enjoyed it.
Right. So I asked her, and she was gracious enough to join me today to talk about it. So, first, let me do a little bio on Miss Woody. After 41 years as a trial attorney, Teresa Woody recently retired as the founding litigation director of Kansas Appleseed Center for Law and Justice, where she brought class action civil rights lawsuits to strengthen the Kansas foster care system, challenge a racist gang identification policing policy, and protect Kansans' voters' rights. Before her time with Kansas Appleseed, Teresa was in private practice with specialties in business litigation and environmental and intellectual property litigation. Teresa has also partnered with the Center for Reproductive Rights over the last 2 decades, bringing lawsuits in Kansas and Missouri challenging laws that would limit women's rights to choose and protect their reproductive health care. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, my first question, since it's a lunch and learn, I've asked everyone over the years, what are you having for lunch?
I am having leftover Thai.
Ah, there you go. There you go. Yeah, my lunch is not spectacular today. There was not, and so I have like one of those little like frozen meals that's like
Oh
high in
yeah, yeah.
protein. I have an apple, some fruit, some water. I'm trying to be healthy, but okay.
Well, this is like leftover pad Thai, so it can never be bad, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah. It's always the best. Okay, so let's get right into it. All right. So we are here to talk about the proposed ballot. Well, it is a question that will be on the ballot. That's not proposed, but it's a proposed change to the Kansas Constitution. So
Yes.
could you please just give us an overview of the background of the question? Like, how are Supreme Court judges currently come to the bench in Kansas?
So currently we use what's called the merit selection system. And this is a system where there is what they call a nominating commission. And the nominating commission takes applications from anyone who qualifies to to apply for a Supreme Court judge in Kansas, which means you have to be an attorney and you have to be 30 years old in the Constitution. And then they look at those applications, do really in-depth analysis of the applications, and talk to folks who know the applicants, really dig into their background, look at the criminal history, if any, look for any kind of disciplinary issues that they might have had as attorneys or judges. And then that panel selects that commission selects three panelists and presents them to the governor, and the governor has to choose one of those individuals to be the Supreme Court justice. Now, the way the nominating commission is selected, it's divided by congressional district. There's one lawyer who's elected by the lawyers from each district, and one layperson who's appointed from each district. And then there's one lawyer who's elected statewide to be the chair of the commission. So it's a 9-person commission with representation from every congressional district by both a lawyer and a lawyer.
Question. When you say that the lawyers are elected, who elects those lawyers?
The
Just
lawyers elect the lawyers. The
okay,
lawyers
so
elect
like
the lawyers.
like the Kansas Bar Association lawyers.
The Kansas Bar, any lawyer. You don't have
Anyway,
to be a member of the Kansas Bar Association to be on the nominating commission.
okay,
You just have to be a licensed lawyer in Kansas
fantastic. Good, thank you.
and lives in that district, right? Who's a resident of the district.
Right, yes. Okay. So oh, you were saying that's how they get there. Right. So now,
Right.
and how did that come to be? I think it's an interesting story in terms of how did we land on that in Kansas as opposed to some other way?
Sure. The way we ended up with that was because of some pretty severe corruption. Prior to 1956, there was an election. The judges were elected. And but in 1956, there was a governor named Fred Hall. He was running for re-election. He lost in the primary, so he wasn't going to be the governor anymore. So he arranged with the then Chief Justice of the Kansas Supreme Court that justice would step down, would resign. Then Governor Hall resigned, and then the lieutenant governor moved up to Governor Hall's position, and then appointed Governor Hall as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And
Right.
he could do that because in between elections, if there's a vacancy, the governor at that point could just appoint anybody that the governor wanted. And so this was called the triple play. It was just terribly corrupt. And here's this individual who couldn't even get reelected as governor, and all of a sudden he's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So that caused a lot of anxiety and anger, and out of that arose the change where justices were no longer elected, but were selected through this nonpartisan merit selection system.
So it was literally like robbing Peter to pay Paul. You lose one thing, but we'll just
Right.
put you someplace else. Yeah.
Right, exactly. He stayed in power. He stayed in power. He wasn't the governor, but now he was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
And that's how, and that happened when you said 1950.
1956 is when the triple play happened, and the change came about in 1958.
1958.
Yeah.
So in Kansas, we've had this merit selection process since 1958.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, there's another piece of the merit selection process I didn't finish talking about, and that's what happens after a justice is selected.
Oh,
Once the governor selects a justice, that governor has to sit at the next general election for a statewide retention election. That's not a partisan election, and nobody's running to oppose the justice, but the entire state citizenry has the ability to say, yes, we like this justice, we want them to be on the Supreme Court, or no, this is not a person we want on the Supreme Court, and they can vote no. And in that instance, the justice would not be retained and would be
right.
off the Supreme Court. Now, that also happens every 6 years. Every 6 years that you have a justice on the Kansas Supreme Court, they face a retention election. And so every 6 years, the citizens have an opportunity to say yes or no, whether that justice stays on the court or not.
And I mean, that's an important distinction because, for example, the United States Supreme Court, they're there for life. And we, as the regular citizenry, never have an opportunity to vote.
Right.
At
That's
all.
exactly right. In the United States Supreme Court appointment system, the citizens have no vote, have actually no input at all directly. And here in Kansas, we do. And the Kansas Supreme Court justices can only sit on the court until they're 75 by statute. So at 75, they have to retire, and then a new justice comes on. So you don't have, individuals who sat on the Supreme Court for, 5 decades. You just don't have that in Kansas.
Gotcha. Okay. This is good. All these details, these are all the details that I definitely want to talk about because these are the details that are not sort of in your average Facebook post. So,
Right. Exactly.
So this is what Kansas does. How is
Mhm.
that different from other states? Like what do other states do?
There's a variety of ways of choosing justices across the many states. 14 states do exactly what Kansas does. As a matter of fact, Missouri was actually the first state to do that, to enact this merit selection system because of another very corrupt issue that went over in Missouri. So it's actually called the Missouri Plan. There are 14 states that follow that exactly. And there are I think there are a total of 21 to 26 states maybe who have some form of merit selection, and only 7 states have partisan elections.
Okay. And that will come up, this notion of partisan elections. Like what will this actually be? Yeah.
Right.
Are there states so there's a mix across the United States.
Right.
Some elect,
Yes.
some merit, some do this, some
Some
do that.
appointments by the governor, with confirmation like the Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court does it. There's a mix.
Yes.
But at least almost pretty close to half have some form of merit selection.
So it's pretty popular.
It is.
So, and it leads well into my next question. Like, does this work? Like, are there states, merit or election? Are there states where it works well? Are there states where it doesn't work well? Like, do we have examples looking around of
Well, I
what's
think you
good
can see. Yeah, I think you can see One thing I will say, there's never been a state who has gone to the merit selection that's gone back. So if Kansas were to do that, Kansas would be the first state to actually reject the merit selection and go back to elections. So I would say that that speaks pretty highly of how satisfied people are with the merit selection of of their justices. It's just it's Kansas, I think, is the first state to try to change it back.
Mhm.
You see in other states, you see a lot of differences, but I mean, there are a lot of examples of it not working very well when you have
Yeah,
elected judges. I mean, Wisconsin just had an election
yeah,
last year to elect a justice. They have statewide elections, and they spent $100 million on that election, and that was not money from Wisconsinites for the most part. That was money pouring in from outside their state, from people who had agendas, trying to choose, the state Supreme Court justices who would follow some kind of agenda. And, not the people of Wisconsin necessarily, weighing in on that. It was really a lot of dark money coming in from people with agendas. So you have that. You have, if you look in North Carolina, where they have elected justices, they just had a very contested election where part of the Supreme Court, because it's a very partisan court, was trying not to seat one of the justices who was elected and
mm,
trying to, have that justice not be on the court for some, very spurious kind of election denying kind of irregularity conspiracies. So it doesn't really work very well in a lot of places to have elected judges. It's very partisan. It costs a lot of
yeah.
money, and I think sometimes the actual citizens of the state, what they care about, which is fair, impartial justices. That's what you really want. That gets lost.
I think I remember that one in Wisconsin really made the news
Oh
because I
yeah.
remember it was Elon Musk, who I don't believe lives in Wisconsin,
No.
but who poured, like you said, tens of millions
Yeah,
of
he
dollars
he
into a
poured at
race.
least $40 million of his own money into this one election. And
Right.
so that just tells you, this is not about what the people of Wisconsin cared about.
Right.
It had
Yeah.
nothing to do with fair judges. It was an attempt to buy justices that would do something that Mr. Musk wanted to see done.
Right. Because let's face it, $40 million is a lot of money.
It's a ton of money. It's
And
a ton
40
of money.
if $40 million got involved in an election in Kansas, that's a lot of money.
That is a lot of money. Yep.
Now, I want to get into, speaking of things that don't often make it onto a regular Facebook post, right? The wording of the ballot, or what will be on the ballot. Now, if
Mhm.
people were to Google, if you Google this, you can find out what the wording of the ballot will be. As we go closer to the election, the Secretary of State's page and the various county election offices, like for example, I live in Johnson County. So eventually, once the ballot gets set, which will be after June 1st, after filing deadline, they will post what everyone's ballot's going to say. So it is going to be very easy for any given person to look up what language will be on the ballot.
And
Now,
this is
I
the
have a
August ballot. This is the primary ballot. Yeah.
yes. Oh,
hmm
thank you for that clarification because there is a different amendment on the general. But so this conversation we're having today is going to focus in on the primary ballot, the August primary ballot. I uh got an idea to look up the actual amendment, like what is actually being changed as opposed to what's the language that's on the ballot. And this is again something that may not make it into your average Facebook post. So, the Kansas Information Network is a nonpartisan C3 organization that's posted a lot of just information about what's going on. And so, they talk about what's proposed, what's being, the summary. Now, when you go down to here, they actually have what the actual amendment is. The measure would amend this section of the state constitution. The underlying text would be added and the struck through text would be deleted. So, this first portion right here is what's going to be on the ballot, right? Which says
hmm
selection of justices of the Supreme Court. The citizens of Kansas who are qualified electors will elect the justices of the Supreme Court the rules applicable for such elections and the designations of position numbers shall be provided by law. Justice positions 1, 2, and 3 shall be elected at the general election in November of 2028. Justice positions 4 and 5 in November of 2030, and justice positions 6 and 7 in November of 2032, and every 6 years thereafter, respectively. Any vacancy occurring on the Supreme Court for an unexpired term shall be filled by, and here we go, as an election provided by law, is that last little bit.
Right.
So that's the wording that's going to be on the ballot. This is the underlined is what this election is. I took some time to read through all the crossed out stuff, which is what they're getting rid of, which is not on the ballot. Like they don't tell you what they're getting rid of. They just tell you what they're putting in.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very telling for me to go through and read through all this crossed out part, which the part that, given what you just talked about, that I find about declaration of people who are being re-elected, the retention, there we go, that's what I want to say,
Yeah.
retention election. His name, I mean, there are female Supreme Court justices, but his name shall be submitted at the general election to the election of the state on a separate judicial ballot without party designation. So currently, when they're up for retention elections, the Supreme Court judges do not have R, D, U, L, libertarian, whatever. They don't have anything behind their name because the Kansas Constitution says that they are without party designation. Fun fact, they're getting rid of that little provision, which means, so this is the devil in the details. When we say that these elections might be partisan, they're not saying these elections are going to be partisan, but they're taking out the provision that makes them not partisan.
Right. And clearly there's an intent for this to be partisan because they're also taking out language that says that the court can't take campaign money.
Yes.
You know, that the justices can't belong to political
which is right here.
Mm-hmm. They're taking all of that says this has to be a non-political position and taking all that out, which means they clearly intend for it to be a political position and a partisan position. And so, you know, one of the things that is really people need to focus on is the language that they're adding says the elections will be held as provided by law. There's nothing in this amendment that tells you how those elections are going to be run, right? So provided by law means as the legislature designates through statute, right? So whatever the law is that the legislature passes, that's going to be how the elections are handled. So if they want partisan elections, they're going to be partisan elections. If they want to just do statewide, all the justices are elected just in a, you know, statewide with no district input, that's what's going to happen. They can also change it. I mean, they could say, oh, we don't like the way these elections are running. So in a couple of years, we're just going to scrap this way the elections are run and do it all differently. So it's very vague as to how this is going to be handled. And clearly, they're going to allow the justices to take campaign donations because they've struck out the part that says they can't. And clearly, they're going to be allowed to hold political office because they struck out the part that says they couldn't. So, you know, this is a huge sea change in how Kansas justices would be selected.
Right. And I to your point, this specifies positions 1, 2, and 3 are positions 4, 5, but it doesn't say districts.
No.
Right? And so
right. And they're, you know, right now, every district has some local input into who the justices are because you have a lawyer on the commission and a layperson on the commission from each congressional district. And what that means is that those people have more information about local applicants. You know, they have they may be able to advocate for somebody, say, you know, in a particular, you know, that they know where somebody's not well known statewide, but they are an excellent candidate for the Supreme Court because they're an excellent lawyer or an excellent judge already who meets all the things, you know, qualifications and requirements that you would hope for a justice to have. And so there's a lot of input. And consequently, we've had a fair amount of geographic diversity on the Kansas Supreme Court with justices from Western Kansas, from Johnson County, you know, from, you know, Northeast Kansas. I mean, all different kinds of justices from different areas of Kansas. That's not necessarily what's going to happen if this changes. It may be, you know, all the justices will be from the most populous area. Maybe you'll never have another judge who's not from Johnson County or Sedgwick County.
Right.
We just don't know.
Right. And I think, I mean, this is just so crucial to talk about these. I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. So let's talk for a second about so now we've talked about what the Constitution says, what the change is, the proposed change. We've even talked a little bit about what is going to be struck out, which I still think my mind was blown when I saw how much was being taken out because that's not on the
Right.
ballot. They don't tell you on the ballot what's being taken out. They only tell you what's being put in.
Right.
But let's talk for a second about what does a no vote mean and what does a yes vote mean? Because we're going to start to see signs: vote yes, vote no, vote yes, vote no. So what does each mean?
Well, let's start with what a yes vote means, because a yes vote means the system is going to be totally changed. A yes vote means that they're going to get rid of the nominating commission, that they're going to allow judges to accept political donations, that they're going to allow applicants for the Supreme Court to hold political positions. There won't be any more retention elections. And retention elections are up or down votes, yes or no, keep the justice or don't keep the justice. They're not these, nasty ad campaign kind of
Yeah.
elections at all. And so, a yes vote really turns this into your average political campaign. So you'll see the nasty ads, and the people who are wanting to be on the Supreme Court are going to have to run around and get campaign donations. So if that's what happens on a yes vote. On a no
Mhm.
vote, you protect the system that we have, which we have impartial justices, and you protect the merit selection system that we've had that's worked well for us since 1958.
Okay. So essentially, yes is yes, I want to change it. No is no, I don't want to change it.
Yeah, no is I like it the way it is. I like our impartial justices. I want it to stay that way.
Okay. Thank you. Now let me go back to my list of questions. Um, So let's this again, we talked a little bit about this detail that any election will be as provided by law and that law has not been written yet.
Great.
So I think it bears noting that the people who write that law, we've been talking a lot about they're doing this, they, this, they. So who is they?
Okay. The people who want this amendment are the Republican supermajority in the legislature. In Kansas, the only way a constitutional amendment can get put on the ballot is through the legislature. The people don't have the right to do it like they do in some other states. So this comes straight out of the legislature. It requires a two-thirds vote of the House and the Senate to get it on the ballot, and Kansas has a supermajority of just those amounts in the House and the Senate. And what's really happening here is there's been some dissatisfaction among some of the Republican leadership, especially with what's happening in the Supreme Court. And they've been unhappy with a couple of issues like school funding and reproductive rights decisions. And so they believe that by getting rid of the merit selection system, they'll be able to have better control as to who gets on the court. And they will have people who aren't necessarily um, impartial, but may have an agenda when they get on the court. And that's what's driving this is frustration by the legislature that they're having to pay for public schools, and that and that people's personal autonomy is being protected.
So and I think I'm gonna repeat that because I think that's such a key factor. In Missouri, questions get on the ballot. A person could just, if they collect enough petition signatures, a person can get something on the ballot. That's not the system here in Kansas. Anytime a question gets on the ballot, it's because two-thirds of the legislature got it on the ballot. So that's why this is even being a question.
Right.
And then I think one of the things that let me back up for a second and acknowledge the other side of the argument. There are people who are in favor of this, who are
Sure.
not members of the Republican supermajority. I know people who, and I would be doing a disservice if I didn't take a second and go, let's give the other
Sure.
side a fair shake. So some of the arguments that I've heard in favor of this especially coming out of the Black community, would
Mhm.
be, well, this nominating commission that you speak of, that's an old, a good old boys network, and they will never let a person like me in. I might as well just take my chances with a statewide vote. And I think it bears it's the unfortunate situation of thinking, well, what does a statewide vote look like in Kansas? Right? Like,
Yeah. I mean, it is true that we have never had a Kansas Supreme Court justice of color, and that is shameful, honestly. But the way that gets changed is to have input on the nominating commission and input through the governor's office, right? And so one of the things that people can do, anybody who wants to get to be one of the lay people on the nominating commission can go to the Kansas government website, and there's a section for boards and people who want to be appointed, and you can scroll down, and there's an application there that says, Supreme Court Nominating Commission, and you can actually put your name in and to be considered as one of those lay people in your congressional district. So that's, I think that's something that people may not have known. I think that, as we get more diversity on the nominating commission, that also leads to more, diversity on the court. Just because it's the same thing, oh, I know this person would be an excellent Supreme Court justice. Another way that you have that is, a lot of times the Supreme Court justices, not always, but they come up through the judicial pipeline, right? Because maybe they've been a district judge or maybe they've been on the Court of Appeals and you can see how they acted as a judge, right? You can see if they were fair. You can see how they treated people. You can see if they were, intellectually robust and supported their decisions and followed the law. You can see all those things. So one way is to get people of color into that pipeline. And Governor Kelly has done a good job of actually putting people of color on the Court of Appeals. And that is a position that she has, control over with Senate consent now. It used to be the same way that the Supreme Court was chosen, but the legislature was able to change that back in the Brownback era because it wasn't in the Constitution. But she still has been able to put people of color on the Court of Appeals. And that's a natural stepping stone up to the merit selection of the Supreme Court. Because there you've got a track record. You can say, oh, Judge so-and-so on the Court of Appeals is an excellent judge, and then that, gives everybody a lot of confidence in putting them on the panel to be one of the panelists to be, chosen from. So and let's be fair, we don't know how those elections are going to run.
right,
And despite the success that we've had with elected officials in some of our, county elections and city council elections and so forth, we have not had a good track record of electing people of color statewide. I don't think we ever have. And
right,
that's, again, doesn't give me any comfort that that will change the makeup of the court in any significant way, especially because what you're going to have is all this money from out of the state pouring in to support people who have an agenda. And so, normal candidates, it won't even be like a normal state candidacy.
right.
It'll be one of these, just gigantic pouring money in from out of state kind of elections.
Right. And so I think, I mean, first of all, like you said, we don't know how elections are going to go. And I hate to be a person here, especially as a Black woman, to say a Black person will never get elected statewide in the state of Kansas, because
I don't
that
believe
that
that.
just that's not definitely doesn't have to be the case. I mean, there have been Black people who have run statewide races. There are currently Black people running statewide races. And so I think, Black people should run statewide races. But I'm going to back up for a second to share how does a layperson make it onto the Supreme Court nominating
Sure.
commission. This is the website, governor.ks.gov, under Serving Kansas, apply to serve. I have talked about boards and commissions a lot. And so, which board and commission are you seeking an appointment? And there are a lot. I had to scroll for a while to get down to the Supreme Court nominating commission. So, this is how, where did it go? This is how a layperson, a non-lawyer, can apply to serve. I think it it bears being pointed out that Governor Kelly has been intentional in diversifying her appointments. She has not been quiet about the fact that she wanted to, but diversity across the board, which means, like, for example, you mentioned earlier that if we go to election, it's possible that everyone will just come out of Johnson County or Sedgwick County. She has even been intentional by diversifying into making sure that people from rural communities are appointed to positions, not just
Exactly.
women or people of color. For
Exactly.
Governor Kelly, diversity means true diversity. So making sure that the rural communities get as much attention as other communities. So a person can get on the Supreme Court, or at least get applied for the Supreme Court nominating commission here. I can tell you, having worked in this administration for 6 years, that they read every application. And if a person does not fit because you mentioned that they had to be in certain geographic districts, if a person perhaps doesn't meet the qualifications geographically, or sometimes there are stipulations on how people are appointed. They read and they'll be like, well, maybe you don't fit the Supreme Nominating Commission, but maybe the State Civil Service Board might be a better fit for you,
Right.
or the State Library of Kansas Board. Like, so the Office of Appointments will find places to put people. So I just wanted to say, this is, so when people say, well, how do I didn't know how to get on it. This is how you get on it,
Yep.
potentially.
That's
This is how you
great.
get into the pipeline.
That's great information because, I mean, there are a lot of those boards and commissions that are begging for people to
Oh my
apply.
gosh.
So,
Yes.
I mean, it's really an opportunity to get, your voice and your community's voice a seat at the table by applying for some of these positions.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so I'm going back to my list of questions. I think we have almost covered everything in terms of the details about this, including what does a yes no mean, what does a yes mean, what does a no mean, what are some arguments for it, and the importance of, like you said, diversifying the pipeline for people to get into the system at every point, if that's becoming an appellate judge, or also getting on commissions. Like, there's whole different ways to diversify the pipeline,
Right.
from the legal side and from the layperson side. Yes, you did mention that any person who's on the Supreme Court would need to be 30 years old. So it's not like I could apply if this does pass. It's not like Stacey Nell, could say, I want to be a Supreme Court judge. I don't meet the qualifications to be a Supreme Court judge.
Right. And the two qualifications in the Kansas Constitution that wouldn't be changed by this, because this is Section 8, and Section 7 just says simply that to be in the to be a candidate for the Kansas Supreme Court, you have to be 30 years old and you have to be a licensed lawyer in Kansas, which again does not mean that you have to be a member of the Kansas Bar Association.
Right.
You just have to be a licensed lawyer. Now there are some other requirements that have been put on by statute. And some of those are like, well, you have to practice in Kansas for 10 years. I'm sorry, you have to practice for 10 years. It doesn't say in Kansas. You have to
Okay.
have been a practicing lawyer for 10 years. And then the thing about having to get off the bench when you're 75. But those two qualifications are by statute, so they could be changed by the legislature. So they could get rid of the 10-year practice requirement, and it could be somebody who just graduated law school, for instance, if that's what they
Hmm.
wanted to do. They could change the age requirement, so you never had to get off. They could just get rid of that and say you could be there when you were 102. So those are things that can be changed. The only guarantees in the Constitution that can't be changed are being 30 years old and being a licensed lawyer in Kansas.
Okay. Well, again, Miss Woody, thank you so much for taking the time today. I want to be mindful of our time. We're about at half an hour. I appreciate just going through all the details, the ins and outs, what this will mean. It is a question that, when I have talked to people sort of out in the wild about, it's a lot of nuance, right?
Yep.
There's a lot of, you have to know this and you have to know that, and the background, and what does it mean, and what's being taken out. And that doesn't fit well on a bumper sticker.
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so thank you for taking the time.
Yeah. What fits well on a bumper sticker is don't buy our courts. Don't
There you
fire
go. Okay. All
But
right. Well, I want to thank you again, and thank everyone for joining us for this discussion today. And I'm sure I know I will be talking about this on a couple times before August. So everyone, please make sure go to the Secretary of State's page under elections drop down voter view. You can make sure you check your registration. If you have a 17-year-old in your life who's going to be turning 18 before the election, please make sure that they are registered to vote. If you would like to change your party affiliation, you have until I believe June 1st to do that, June 14th maybe to do that, but you can do all that online. And so just please start to make a plan for voting in both the August primary election, which is August 4th, and the general election, which is November, oh gosh, 3rd, I think. I'm so focused on the August 4th primary that I'm almost not even paying attention to the general.
right,
All
right.
right.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.